Okay. We are the 2nd of June 2023 as I start recording this video. And I intend to provide not a lecture, but to talk about metaphysics. Yeah. I will comment this later, but yeah, I intend to talk about metaphysics. But I will begin by, do we see? Yeah. I wrote a few notes. The global village, yeah. We live in a global village because the information can circulate instantaneously all over the world through the medium of the internet. And there's only one world. It's like a big village. And I understood many years ago that the world had lost its metaphysics. Metaphysics is the universal language of the mind, one might say. The thoughts that all humans have and that they express unconsciously, most of them through language. And in order to restore order, one has to restore metaphysics to reconstruct what has been deconstructed. Yeah. Also, I will show some books. So here's a book. I haven't read this book and most of the books that I promote, but it's just to illustrate the zeitgeist, one might say. I've been reading this book lately and I will briefly comment Mr. Dawkins' view on Essentialism. Yeah. The internet enables and will bring about the abolition of the educational system everywhere eventually, simply because it's no, this book is for later. This is a free market of ideas, and the good thing about the free market is that it enables the best to rise and shine, and knowledge is being produced in real time all over the world by great content creators, and it brings competition to the monopoly that the state has and the journalists and the scholars and the politicians have on public discourse. And independent content creator all over the world in institutes or individuals or think tanks, etc., they can produce and share knowledge, and all these ideas popping up from everywhere all over the world, they constitute the coming into being of a world consciousness. Yeah. And yeah, so it makes most of traditional institutions redundant and expandable, one might say. Yeah. So, okay, we didn't see, but now we see. We see. Okay, so we live, whether people are aware of this or not, we live in revolutionary times because precisely there's a dramatic shift in the spread of knowledge and information. And here are ecological books, as a transition handbook, from oil dependency to local resilience, manual for those who want to live isolated from the world, the 100-mile diet, local eating, bullshit jobs, how to think about the economy, and a great book by Mr. Deist, or Deist, Jeff Deist. So ecological, left-wing, anarchist and libertarian books. Yeah, this is the kind of mindset that I've been in. Yeah, so yeah, that's the introduction. It's a little bit boring, but yeah. Yeah. So, no. So we live in revolutionary times. It's a long process, but in order to stabilize the process and to favor and promote order, one might say, the sharing of information is universal. It happens in each particular country and each singular individual. At least those who are vaguely aware or vaguely intelligent, they have a responsibility to try to bring about change in the most peaceful, the most reasonable sense. And here I do a little bit of virtue signaling. I have been distributing books on a singular level, me as an individual, for months now, books like these, not this one, but books like these, namely, to encourage on my singular level, people to change their diet, to eat local, organic, fresh produce, products and fruits, vegetables, etc. I have been cleaning the streets. Here is what I gathered this afternoon. I've been cleaning the streets, picking up the trash for probably more than 7 months now, almost on a daily basis. So a little bit each day for a few dozens of minutes, I clean the streets. I distribute good books. I distribute supplies, and I encourage people to gather supplies. I distribute good books about economics. If you live in an English-speaking country, you could distribute this book. It's really great. If, unfortunately, the people do not speak English very well, there are good books available. I've been distributing books like these. That's just an example. Lions led by donkeys. This is the fate of entrepreneurs in collectivist countries. The lions are the entrepreneurs, the donkeys, in the view of Mr. Charles Gaff, who is, one might say, a libertarian economist, are the civil servants and the politicians, which are sometimes a little bit redundant, precisely. Yeah. So, encouraging the spread of information, intelligent, reasonable books to help people understand the world better and to act on a singular level. This is what I've been promoting while sharing lectures, insights, references, by communicating publicly. Yeah. Also, I wrote first. I've already showed this, but I've been distributing T-shirts as well. I've been participating in local charities or associations, and I encourage every person who watches this, who wants to act responsibly, to do so as well. If you act, even if it's just a couple of hours a week or a few dozens of minutes a day of civic duty, it's still good, because we live in an era where a lot of change are occurring and people, they need stability and balance, and it is the responsibility of each responsible person to do his part on a singular level. Yeah, I can only encourage. Yeah. So now, you also about knowledge. I wrote, I am a process, which means that I evolve, I change, I mature, I grow, I develop every day. I gather knowledge every day because I spend a certain amount of time reading books, and I try to share. My knowledge with others, but since I'm a process, my knowledge is incomplete, so I'm aware that I share incomplete knowledge, but I am torn between the interest and the will to accumulate knowledge, to become smarter, better, and to communicate better as well, which will be one of the primary purpose of this video, and also to share with others. So there's the selfish aspect, but also the fair play, the collective aspect. I try to mix the two. Yeah, so that's the reason why the quality of my videos is not always great, one might say, and it can be improved intellectually, formally, aesthetically, in terms of communication, but precisely, I could step aside and try to become perfect, but I try to improve on an individual level while sharing moments of my process. Yeah, so here we are the 2nd of June. I know that I will improve. I will continue to improve. Yeah. Also, I wrote, I don't teach anything except how to learn. Yeah, I teach a method in a way of learning. I try to clarify, and here the purpose of this video will be to make metaphysics, basic philosophical determination, to make them accessible and intelligible for people who have no previous backgrounds. But here I'm partly autistic, one might say, so I tend to live in my own world and encountering and interacting with ordinary people. It makes me grow and mature and become better in a way. Yeah. Some people have said, no, you can't get better, you are already too good. That's a joke, that's a joke, that's a joke. No, seriously, I improve a lot when I interact with empirical. Where is empiricism? Yeah, with empirical people. Most of the day I am in my metaphysics, and I tend to interact with empirical people, with real people, with with a posteriori people. No, that's a joke. With phenomenal people. No, seriously, with singular individuals. Yeah, and it makes me grow and mature because I am more able to communicate complex metaphysical ideas. I try to adapt, not without compromising on certain intellectual standards, but I try to adapt to others and to make really high quality knowledge, what I say, accessible to a broader range of people. I can still improve, but that's what I've been working on. So I've given up on the complexities, the very sometimes excessive, very complex aspect of German metaphysics to be more broadly available. Yeah, so I will talk about metaphysics. Here I just say what this represents. These are, I should have begun with this maybe, these are a simplification of the categories of the logic of essence, but actually most of the categories of the sciences. And the boxes in red, in a way, in a very broad way here, I really simplify, they can be more or less, they are more or less similar. These are different words to express not exactly the same categories, but the same broad, they have a lot in common, and the categories in green, the boxes in green, they are what precisely the categories in red manifest in an idealist, I will define what is in a metaphysical perspective. So here I briefly comment the categories. Empiricism. So these are, if I really simplify, for someone who has absolutely no background in philosophy whatsoever, the categories in green, they can be more or less thought of as being synonymous. Of course, it's not really the case, but if we had to simplify, and the categories in red as well. So, empiricism is the realm of experience through the senses, and metaphysics is that which is beyond the phenomenal, the material, the sensuous world. Yeah. Events, it can be physical events, meteorological events, news events, any sort of events, occurrences, things which happen. They are the manifestation of laws. In a philosophical perspective, what we live in, the world in which we live, is the real world in ordinary language, and the realm of ideas is the realm of the intellect. Here, that's the view of Plato. The ideas of Plato, they are thought to be beyond the sensuous, material, empirical world. Yeah. Here, these are categories of the sciences. Where is Mr. Dawkins? Yeah. For instance, that's a book about evolutionary biology. In physics, the phenomenal world, the world of phenomena, is the manifestation of fundamental forces. As far as I know, modern physicists, they acknowledge 4 forces, sometimes less, sometimes more. The electromagnetic force, gravitation, which is not always considered as a force in the relativistic theory, but simplified electromagnetism, gravitation, and strong and weak interaction, which are sub-atomic forces in the nucleus of atoms. But gravitation, this is mass and how objects attract each other through their mass, and electromagnetism is how positive and negative electric charges attract or repel each other. Yeah, these are the 2, electromagnetism and gravitation, the 2 fundamental forces which are being manifested all over us. The reason why my hand cannot cross the table board is because there is electromagnetic repulsion between the atoms of my knuckle and the atoms of the table board. The reason why I am standing on the ground is because the earth is exerting gravitational pull and attraction because of the mass of my body. Yeah, all the variety, the multiplicity of phenomena of the natural world, the physical world, is on a fundamental, on a theoretical level, the manifestation of 2 forces plus weak and strong interaction on a subatomic level. Yeah. So that would be nature and the theoretical grasping of nature, physics and metaphysics. Yeah. Here, the singular and the universal, that's UPS. Every event, every singular occurrence, every object is precisely a singularization of a universal. This singular book, the universal can be books about economics, or books by the Mises Institute, or books written in English. The universal here can be modified depending on the categorization, but every singular object is a singularization of the genus. In, where is Mr. Dawkins? In biology, UPS, that's genus, species, individual. Here, we'll just take an example that I often take. Here we have a singular apple, a singular banana, a singular orange, and a singular strawberry. They are all organic and locally grown, except the banana, maybe, but yeah. These are singular fruits. The particular here would be strawberry, that would be the species, the variety, orange, apple, banana, and the universal is fruit. And the universal is invisible in a way. It only exists through the manifestation, the singularization. So the fruit is the essence in a way. And the existing fruits are the singular fruits. Yeah, that's an illustration. So the same universal runs through, or is being manifested, or is being made present through these 4 different fruits. But the universal precisely is invisible, and it only exists through the manifestation of the universal, or the manifestation of the essence. Yeah. Then, in the realm of the sciences, the events or the phenomena, the purpose of a scientist is to seek the cause, the reason, the laws which make which affect the changes, the effects, precisely that which affects the movement and change and evolution of events is the cause. The matter and the form, the material world is being shaped, is being informed in a way that there are shapes to the objects surrounding us, and the material aspect of objects is that which how should I explain this? The substratum, one might say, the physical substratum, and the form is the shape. These are other words. Yeah. And here, the theory of Plato, the ideas of Plato, in English, sometimes they are called the forms. Yeah. So the ideas are to reality what the forms are to the material world. Differently, principles and consequences, here that's either in mathematics, the consequences which derive from an axiom, from a fundamental assertion, one might say. The consequences, these are not the effects of a cause, it's differently, but the consequences of a mathematical axiom are contained within precisely the axiom. Or in ethics, the consequences of the effect, yeah, behaving according to principles means to manifest or to produce effects in reality according to principles. The principle of causality, namely that there is a rational relationship between an action and the consequences that it brings, that's a principle, and the consequence is that for a cause there is an effect, etc. A priori and a posteriori, here that's Kantian vocabulary. A priori means what can be known independently of experience through deduction, logic, logical laws, and a posteriori is that which can be known only after having been experienced. Yeah. Existence and essence. What exists is that which comes out of the essence. These are the characteristics that all singulars have in common. Basically, the essence of these four objects would be fruitness or fruithood, or the idea of fruit. These are four existing fruit. They all share in common the same essence, one might say. Yeah. The existing objects are to their essence what the singulars are to the universal. Here I will not delve into too much complexity, but yeah. Then, formulated differently, the ideas, the laws, the universal, the principles is that which can that which can be grasped through the intellect, whereas the empirical world, the manifested world, the world of events, is that which is experienced through sensation, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, etc., etc. Yeah. Someone, I think Deleuze, the French philosopher, said, the concept of a dog does not bark. The concept of a dog, that would be the idea, it makes no sound. Yeah. Here, in classical history of philosophy, Aristotle would be the philosopher of the realm of ideas, the a priori, that's not the vocabulary of Plato, but the realm of ideas, metaphysics. Aristotle would be, although it is Aristotle who coined the term metaphysics, or those who classified his books, here the anecdote is not really important, but Aristotle was more focused on the realm of sensation and experience, whereas Plato was more intellectual, more in the realm of ideas, the universal, detached from the sensus, constantly changing, unfolding, change of phenomena. And later, so here that's 4th century BCE, here that's 17th century AD, Leibniz was some sort of an heir of Plato. Locke was is considered to be one of the founders of modern empiricism, namely the idea, the Anglo-Saxon idea predominantly, that knowledge can be derived from empirical. It has to be first experienced, and only the existing singular objects have reality. And the Anglo-Saxon, if I simplify, they would say that most of the categories in red they are delusions of the mind. They are only singular objects that affect us through the senses, and the boxes in red, these are a priori construct of the mind. That would be the view of Locke, whereas Leibniz, like most idealist philosopher, he believes in the primordial nature of the intellect, that there are innate ideas. Yeah. According to Locke, the ideas, the categories of logic, reasoning, the axioms of mathematics, they are derived from a lot of experience. According to Leibniz, they are innate in our mind, and they are only awakened by, they are within the soul. Here that would be the view of Plato, here within the mind, basically. That's the view of Descartes as well. There are innate ideas, and they can be awakened through experiencing the world through sensation. I simplify. And Kant, basically Kant, here, that's Kant. I simplify. Kant is the guy who called the realm of the intellect. Here I simplify. No, actually no. For Kant, the noumena are to the phenomena. The phenomena is that which is appear. The noumena would be the ideas, in a way. In the vocabulary of Kant, here that would be the vocabulary of Plato. Here Kant. For Kant, reality are just phenomena, and behind reality that there are noumenal objects that we cannot know because of the limitations of our intellect. I simplify. And here, thought and experience, we experience the world through sensation, singular objects, empirical collecting of data, etc. And we think about our experience and this ability to connect, to reflect upon, to extract what is common to the singular events that we encounter daily in our physical existence, sensation, the ability to unite the infinite variety and multiplicity of phenomena and the wealth of experience is the ability to think, namely to predicate categories to the sensuous phenomenal world. Yeah. That's what I had to say. Okay. Maybe 20 minutes introducing... Yeah, and here I will talk about Dawkins. Dawkins is a great scientist, of course. I read this yesterday, I think. He complains about biological essentialism, and his view, I will not, but basically what he says is that I simplify, but the reason why the theories of Darwin, according to Dawkins, have not sprung forth and have not been conceptualized earlier than the 19th century is that because, in his view, scientists were deceived by essentialism, which is another form of Platonism, namely the idea that, in the perspective of biology, that each species was set, fixed, stable, immutable, because it was the reflection, not necessarily, but it was created, these are the view of the creationist, each species belonged to an eternal type, an unchanging, immutable type. That would be the essence, so that each dog, each gorilla, each horse, each dolphin, etc., was each existing dolphin or existing horse was the manifestation of its essence, the archetype. Here I could have said archetype, that's another word. Whereas the view of Darwin was that precisely there are no universal, there are no ideas in a sense of Platonic sense, namely archetypes which exist in an intellectual realm, no essences, but precisely animals and all biological life is in a process of constant evolution, which means in constant change. So there are no a priori designed living beings in the mind of God, in the view of Dawkins. They exist as effects or consequences of the principle of evolution by natural selection, and an evolution and the variety of all life forms and species are precisely the result, the effects, the consequences, the manifestation of natural selection. Yeah, and that's the view of Dawkins, the epistemology, briefly simplified at the beginning of the book, that scientists have taken a long time in the chronological perspective to stumble upon Darwinism because they were trapped, that's not what he says, but I simplify it, by essentialism. Yeah. But here, the theory of evolution, it's an idea, and the phenomena, namely the evolution of animals and life forms over long periods of time, or sometimes not so long, but the evolution of life and the transformation, the evolution of species, that would be what can be noticed through experience by watching fossils or the breeding of domesticated species. But the idea which shapes, here shapes is another word for form, would be the theory of natural selection. A theory, that's why it's a metaphysical view. So every scientist, here I agree with the boring German metaphysician, every scientist is a metaphysician because to do science is precisely to go beyond the phenomenon, to try to connect and to put relationships of causality, to think about the sensuous experience. So Dawkins is a metaphysician like all other scientists because he's a thinker. He's not a poet. He can make great poetry maybe sometimes, but like every scientist, he tries to relate, to put into connection, to reflect upon, to predicate thoughts, categories to the physical world. And this is precisely to go beyond what is physical. This is thought. The problem with the Anglo-Saxons are great, of course, but if I had to make a little bit of a criticism borrowed from the Germans, but actually it's true, the Anglo-Saxons, they are unconscious metaphysicians. They use metaphysics, namely categories, logic, thought, without being aware of the categories that they use. Yeah. But otherwise, they are great, of course. Yeah, so that's what I had to say. Now, about idealism. Where is my... my Platonic shirt. Yeah. So that's what I wrote briefly. Okay. Idealism, I simplify to the utmost. There are various ways of defining. One of the ways is that reality is a product of consciousness. Realism, which is the view of the overwhelming majority of humans, there is a really existing world, an objective world, which is independent of the subject which perceives the world. It's common sense. Idealism can be understood as meaning that actually it is not, the world does not exist independently of the observer. It is consciousness which produces the world. That's the view, notably, of some Indian idealists like Sankara, I think that's an 8th century Indian mystic. The idea that it is consciousness which produces the world, in a way. That's the mystical view, in a way. Another definition, that would be the view of Plato, is that objects, or events, or reality in ordinary sense, or singular objects, or existing objects, are images, reflections of the forms, the ideas, in a way. So that the sensuous world, the objects that we encounter, precisely that's the classical view of Plato, that's Platonic dualism. Singular objects are reflections, manifestations of archetypes, their essence, their universal, their ID. That's another view another definition of idealism. And a third definition, one might say, is that here I'm talking about philosophical idealism, not political idealism. The third view is that people do not have ideas, ideas have people. That's the view that actually individuals, the whole world is nothing but a stage, and the actors are merely players, as Shakespeare would say, I think. The idea that humans, in a way, they do not have ideas, they are, ideas have humans, in a way, in the sense that humans are tools through which ideas or spirits becomes conscious of itself, and every human in this perspective, that's the Hegelian and Spinozian view, partly, that each human is a receptacle of the movement of ideas, in a way, like an antenna which grasps, that's the view of Fichte, actually, that's the view of German idealism. Yeah, and here, liberation, in a Spinozian and Hegelian sense, can partly mean to become aware of the reason why one has the ideas that one has. Spinoza says somewhere, men believe themselves to be free because they are aware of their actions, but they are unaware of the reasons behind their actions, of the motives, of the cause. So Spinoza says basically, humans, they are most of the time they are aware that they act, but they are unaware of the reason which makes them act. So in a way, they are an example that he takes is that if a rolling stone, was rolling down an inclined plane, the stone, if it had a consciousness, it would think that it is the will of the stone to roll down the plane, or the tree in the forest, if he had a consciousness, in the Spinozian view, the tree would believe that his will is to grow and to elevate itself towards the light. Whereas actually, a scientific perspective, the reason why the stone rolls down is because of gravitation, and the reason why the trees grow towards the sky is because it seeks the light from the sun to be able to photosynthesize particles from the atmosphere, etc., etc. Yeah. And the Spinozian perspective is to apply natural process to humans, to consider, in a first moment, humans like the extension of the natural world. Yeah, and to be liberated, in a Spinozian perspective, is to become aware of one's own determinism. Yeah. Yeah. And also, the view of Kant, in terms of idealism, I simplify to the utmost. Kant, that would be here, Kant basically says, we cannot know the object, we can only know the phenomena, we can predicate categories to the phenomena by becoming aware of the lawfulness of nature, namely that the phenomena are regulated and ruled and governed by laws, the natural phenomena, so we can become aware of this, but we cannot know what really is behind the phenomena, the essence of the objects. These are the noumena in the vocabulary of Kant. So we are never sure that we cannot know what the objects are. We can only know our own faculty of knowing. So the philosophy of Kant is basically philosophical introspection, not psychological but philosophical introspection. Die Kritik der reinen Vernunft, the critique of pure reason. Pure reason is self-investigation of reason, which, because the object is out there, and we can never be sure that what we think about the object is really how the object is. We can only know the phenomena, but not the noumena, the essence, one might say. But we can know, from the Kantian perspective, we can investigate rationally our own faculty of knowing. That's the critique of pure reason, not the book, but the process of self-investigation of reason. Yeah, that's the view of Kant. So the Kantian idealism is that the mind has a given structure and it can predicate its own categories onto the events by discovering the laws, but not it is the mind, reason, the Vernunft, which predicates its own categories onto the objective world, but we cannot really know what is behind the phenomena. I limited knowledge to leave room for faith. That's what Kant says. So what would be behind the phenomena? That would be the absolute, or God, in a way. According to Kant, we cannot know what manifests the phenomena. We can only believe. Yeah. But we have to presuppose, in the realm of ethics, free causality, namely the ability to produce effects based on free will. That's a belief that Kant has, that we are not fully determined by the laws of nature. So that's the opposition between Spinozian determinism and Kantian ethics, in a way. Yeah. I wrote about economics. Here's a good book about economics. About economics and nature. Nature here. These categories, they can partly be envisioned as being nature in a philosophical perspective, namely the physical, spatio-temporal, objective world, and ideas, forms, a priori would be, noumena would be the mind, the intellect, the thought, etc., etc. Yeah. So, I wrote here from that's a common economic perspective. Most objects of our surroundings, at least in developed environments, are ideas which have been realized, which have been made actual, in a way. I wrote it is informed matter, or matter which has been shaped, designed and shaped. Yeah, the objects surrounding us, especially in developed economies, have been designed and shaped by human action. Humans, through their action, they can shape the natural world, the material world, and shape, that's another word for form, which is another word for idea. So humans, they manifest the content of their mind by purposeful, conscious behavior. They shape their surrounding environments. They turn forests into fields, they build houses, they grow crops on farmland, they build tools, etc., etc. They homestead, they interact with their environment through will, action, intent, etc. And yeah, most, if not all objects which surround us, they have been thought of, they have been designed, they have existed in the mind of humans before being brought forth. Someone invented this, someone thought about this t-shirt, etc. Even just an apple, it seems to be a natural object. Actually, the variety, the selective breeding, etc., is the process of human work. Here, that's some kind of an intelligent Marxist perspective. This fruit is not, strictly speaking, natural. The matter, the content is natural, but the form, it has been selected. It's not genetically modified, but it has been unconsciously or consciously selected for generations. The chemicals, or lack thereof, is a product of human action, etc. It has been brought to the market, etc. So even natural objects, they are the product. Cattle, here, Dawkins would agree, cattle, it seems to be, these are natural objects. The cows, the chicken, no, chicken is not cattle, but the cows, the calves, the bulls, etc., or horses, in terms of for competition, or for or simply for farm labor, they have been selected, or dogs. Most animals, they have been bred. That's what is called selective breeding, for generations, sometimes for centuries or millennia, and they are the result of unconscious, purposeful human behavior. In a way, the domesticated animals, most of the time, they haven't been consciously selected by humans most of the time. For rare breed horses, it has been the case. Sometimes for dogs of specific qualities being sought, yes, or milk producing cows, etc. But for a long period of time, it has been done unconsciously. Yeah. But precisely, domestication is an example of how human can plan and design natural living objects by selective breeding, by transforming the conditions to bring about the desired ends. Yeah, and I wrote here that's the view of Plato, that God, from the perspective of Plato, that's the demiurge or the architect. In the Platonic view, God, or however he calls this, is the entity which shapes the material world. So there is the material world that's sometimes seen in Greek mythology as the primordial chaos, and there is an architect, a demiurgos, who gives shape to the informed, undifferentiated primordial matter, and brings forth order, one might say, and design. Yeah, so the gods of the Greeks, they were not creators, strictly speaking, they were designers, more of designers. And I wrote here, that's kind of a Hegelian view, that almost all landscapes in civilized areas have been shaped by human action. There are no natural landscapes as such in the overwhelming majority of civilized areas. Even the forests or the mountains, they have been shaped by decades, centuries, sometimes millennia of human action. There are pathways in forest, some trees have been cut, some buildings have been built, they are being constantly modified. Natural landscapes almost no longer exist in a continent like Europe. There are very few places on Earth which haven't been at least slightly modified by humans. Yeah. I will just take a glass of water. Yeah. So, about dualism. So these are simplifications of the categories of the sciences. Empiricism. Here, so I briefly commented, but here I go a little bit more. I clarify more. Empiricism means, simplified, to collect experiences as they occur. An empirical outlook on any topic means to collect the data and to infer from the experience. Yeah. Metaphysics, very simplified, means to go beyond the singular events, the phenomena, and to connect them, to relate them, to reflect upon them, to abstract and to extract the universal out of the singular. Yeah. So, for instance, the metaphysics, botanics, would be the empirical aspect would be to taste the fruits, and the metaphysical, which is the scientific aspect, would be to try to reflect, to extract out of these four different fruits and these four different varieties of truth what they have in common by leaving aside determination, the color, the taste, the shape, the size, the chemical composition, etc., and to extract what is universal, what is valid for all. And here I don't know what is the biological definition of a fruit, but botanists probably they know what is the difference between fruits and vegetables. I don't know, but to grasp the essence of fruits means to have in a way, very simply, to have a metaphysical outlook. It is to go beyond the physical. Yeah. And here, what do for instance, these two books have in common. These are abstract books about economics, but to think about these two books, to read these two books, that's good. But then to think about what they have in common, both books are books about Austrian economics, it means to extract the universal out of the singular. The ideas, one might say, yeah. In ordinary meaning, in ordinary meaning, experience means what is concrete, and thought is that which is abstract. So I could have added the categories concrete and abstract. What is concrete is that which is fully determined. This is a singular apple. It is concrete because it has a specifically determined shape, size, color, mass, etc. It is fully determined. An apple in general has no fully determined, no specific taste, color, shape, etc. There are green apples, yellow apples, red apples, big apples, small apples, etc., etc. So, yeah, what is metaphysical in a way is abstract because it leaves aside the many determination of the sensuous world, but it has a broader extension. UPS. The S is the most rich, the most fully determined, but it only extends to the singular, whereas the universal is valid for all those who share the same universality in common. Yeah, so yeah, experience is, in ordinary language, is thought to be concrete, and thought is considered to be abstract, but here, in a Hegelian perspective, what is abstract is that which is taken out of the totality to which it belongs. That which is taken out of context, one might say. Only a moment in the unfolding of a process or a point within a full picture. And here, Mr. Per Byland, somewhere, if I take too much time, I will not... but somewhere he has the same view, namely that when we look at the economy, he emphasizes the idea that the economy is a process, and therefore, singular economic events or data or signals, they have to be recontextualized within the totality on a chronological but also geographical perspective. For instance, minimum wage laws, having no minimum wage laws, it can be thought of as harming the poor, but actually, in the process, it enables people with low skills to be hired more easily and then to gain training on the job and to improve and to acquire skills. So yeah, that's just an example. So a lot of here, that's what Henry Hazlitt already understood. In the book, the classic Economics in One Lesson, there are a lot of disagreements between economists because there are different views most of the time, or a lot of time they depend on a different perspective. Namely, there are those who look at the immediate effects and those who look at the longer term, those who look at only a specific group and those who look at all the groups. I know more or less. The art of economics consists in looking not merely at the immediate but at the longer effects of any act or policy. It consists in tracing the consequences of that policy not merely for one group but for all groups. According to Hazlitt, the whole of economics can be summarized by this sentence: consequences, etc. So, that's why to think in a concrete way, it doesn't mean to be an Anglo-Saxon empiricist from a Hegelian perspective, it means to reconsider, to recontextualize the events within a totality. Yeah. Then, about ordinary consciousness. I wrote, most people, they wander randomly through life. They go from one event to the other. They only encounter singular events. They go about in life with most of the time no consciousness of the noumenal realm in the vocabulary of Kant, or the realm of ideas, or the universal, or the laws which govern the manifested events that they encounter. A lot of people, because either they do not have the time, or the interest, or the education, or the intelligence, or the possibility, or the interest, they just live in the realm of, here in Platonic language, that would be doxa and episteme. Doxa is the realm of opinion, episteme is the realm of knowledge. A lot of people, they just go about in life, and they do not think about the metaphysical realm, one might say, which is not, in a way, disconnected from the singular events which are being encountered in daily experience, but precisely every singular event is the manifestation of universal laws. And a lot of people, actually most people who are not scientists or philosophers, scientists here in a broader sense, they do not think about the hidden forces behind the reality that they experience through the senses. Yeah. I wrote, they wander, but they do not wander. The scientists, they tend to wander. Mr. Dawkins wrote a book about the magic of reality. The scientists, they are the philosophers, they are in a state of wonder. They wonder why things are the way they are. And the empirical scientists, or the empiricists, they wander and they wander. The view of Aristotle was to wonder about metaphysics and to wonder, I mean, I'm not sure that Aristotle did this, but the modern scientific revolution with Galileo, and then Bacon, here that would be Francis Bacon, and Galileo, and Newton, and later development of science, would be to investigate and to wonder. Yeah. Precisely, the German thinkers, they tend to wander, but not to wander a lot. They are armchair philosophers, armchair theorizing, as the Anglo-Saxons call this. But a man of experience is a man who has wandered a lot. A man of intellect is a man who has wandered a lot, a philosopher, because he asks himself questions constantly about the nature of things, which is another word for the essence. Yeah. I wrote, a lot of people, they do not, precisely, those who wander without wonder, they do not connect the phenomena, they do not see the patterns. The patterns, that's another word for the laws. And people with experience and wisdom, they tend to generalize, that's another word for universal, based on their experience, precisely, and the stereotypes and popular wisdom. It is kind of a knowledge, it's not really a knowledge, but it's these are assertions which are derived from a posteriori experience. Someone who has lived a lot of experiences, he can draw inferences, namely generalization out of his personal experience, and he can detect patterns. And usually the stereotypes, because they have survived, here that would be a Darwinian perspective, the popular beliefs, if they have survived throughout the ages, centuries or millennia sometimes, it's because they contain a seed of truth. It's not scientifically expressed, but popular folk wisdom, or the classical sayings of the people, they tend to have an aspect of truth. And here, the modern leftist intellectual, their view tends to say that whatever common sense says is wrong. That's deconstructionism in a way. But common sense, it tends to reappear no matter how no matter how hard people try to suppress common sense. Yeah, I could make a good joke. The role of modern leftist intellectual is to say to the people, whatever you perceive is not real. What we say through the media, academia, political discourse is reality. Your experience, that's a delusion. You are being prejudiced, biased, bigoted, whatever, fake information, etc., etc. Yeah. I wrote, so people, when they have experiences and when they grow older, they tend to infer generalization a posteriori, whereas the scientists, they tend to think a priori. Yeah. Although strictly speaking, no, because, yeah, but, yeah, the Austrian method in science, I will talk about this later maybe, the Austrians, their method is a priori, namely, they do not collect data empirically and then try to give explanations. They try to deduce logically a priori through the intellect. That would be that's a Kantian view of economics. That's the view of Mises. They try to deduce the laws of economics a priori and then to interpret the reality, the events, the singular occurrences of economics through the lens of their a priori deductive system. But actually, I agree with them because that's the proper method, the method of knowing. Because otherwise, if the economists, they just talk about the singular events which occur, if they have no metaphysical frame, if they have no method, if they have no system of thinking, they can misinterpret completely, and that's what they do most of the time. So basically, the Austrians, they are the metaphysician of economics in a way. Also, I wrote Plato's puppet showmen, the showmen in the cave. These are the people who precisely they meddle or they interfere between the empirical experience of people and the metaphysical underlying. And there are people, I wrote, most of the time, it can be right-wingers as well, but most of the time these are leftist intellectuals or scholars, journalists, politicians who wage war on the perception of reality of ordinary people through the manipulation of language and images in the media to shape the perception, to say that whatever people experience does not exist, or people are wrong to think what they think about what they experience. Those who control the language and the means of communication, they can shape the perception of others, and in order to do so, they have to mingle, in a way, to prevent people from accessing the ideas, the universals, the essence of things, to think correctly. Yeah, this is what happens. Examples about crime, about the change of demographics in Western countries. A lot of people who are in position of influence and power, they say it does not happen, or it's not what you think it is, etc. Yeah. So I wrote, a few people with prestige and influence can alter and shape the perceptions of millions of others, and this is, in religious language, the church, not the historical Catholic Church, but actually the church, not as an empirical existing institution, but as a concept, I may say. The church, precisely, these are the intellectuals who meddle with the perception of reality of ordinary people, and who have the knowledge, and either they share only parts of knowledge, or they distort the knowledge, and they can manipulate, in a way, through control of the flow of information, they can manipulate the perception of others. This is what Plato already called the puppet showman. That's why the puppet showmen in Plato's cave, these are the clerks and the priests of medieval Catholic Church. In the modern world, these are the journalists and the intellectuals and the scholars. In the Soviet regimes, these were the members of the party, the Pravda, the Politburo, etc., etc. And here, this is what the church is. It's not. I'm not talking about the empirical church. I'm talking about a group of knowledgeable people who have a pretense of sharing knowledge for the good of others, while retaining certain information, saying certain things but not others. This is how they operate, and it's very easy when you have a monopoly on knowledge to shape the perception of others. Yeah. I took a few examples in modern pop culture of illustration of the myth of the cave of Plato. That's the incarnation of the soul, in a way, or the fall of the soul in the material world, the loss of memory. These are three examples which can be interpreted as illustrating unconsciously, of course, the myth of the cave in modern pop music. Yeah. Dua Lipa, Physical, Avril Lavigne, Hot, Paramore, Decode. Yeah. Then, about a cosmic view of knowledge. I wrote here that's cosmic, a cosmotheist view, in a way. The stars produced historically in a chronological, cosmological perspective, the stars produced the heavy atoms which form most of the material world of the Earth. The dominant elements in the universe are helium and hydrogen and helium. These are light, not in a sense of enlightening, but the opposite of heavy, light atoms. And the heavier atoms, which the nitrogen, carbon, iron, etc., which oxygen, which compose most of the elements of the earth and the matter, the materials with which humans are composed of, the overwhelming majority, they have been forged in the death of stars. This is what Mr. Krauss says. He says, forget Jesus, the stars died so you could be born. That's a poetic way for an atheist philosopher to express the idea that humans are composed of stardust, in a way. So stars, historically, in the chronological perspective, the cosmological perspective as well, have produced heavy atoms. Atoms have interacted chemically, which has, the official narrative says, broadly 4 billion years ago. Chemical interactions have brought about self-replicating chemical components which have become de facto alive. Life has emerged out of chemical interactions. Life, primitive, simple cells have developed, unfolded, reproduced, and evolved over many billions of years, which has brought forth human beings, something like modern humans officially that's 200,000 years ago, but proto-human that's broadly 7 million years ago in the most recent, I simplify, but billions of years of biological evolution, which is the result of chemical and atomic and solar and cosmological evolution, have produced human beings and the human brain. The human brain, which is the vehicle, the physical vehicle of intelligence, has produced human societies and institutions. That's history in the continuity of natural socio-biological evolution. Institutions and societies have enabled humans, some of them, to study astronomy, astrophysics, and by getting to know the laws which govern the movement of the heavenly bodies and the evolution of the cosmos, humans know how the stars and the planets and the solar systems and the galaxies have formed and how they evolve and the laws which govern their movement. Here there's a song by Paris Hilton, "The Stars Are Blind." So in the process, that's the cosmic view, those humans like Newton or Mr. Krauss and all the modern physicists, already Galileo and Einstein and all the modern physicists, who have unfolded the laws governing the evolution, the forces behind the manifested physical universe, they have come to know more or less accurately, it's a process, etc. They have come to know the stars, one might say, and the planets. So actually, in a full process, the stars bring about the heavy atoms, chemical reactions, biological evolution, human and historical evolution, scientific development, which goes back to the knowledge of the stars. So, from here, that's a materialist perspective. The matter of the stars is still present in the brain of the scientist who elaborates complex theories to get to know the cosmos. So in a way, through the mediation of all this process, in a cosmological perspective, humans who think about the stars, who observe, or it can include poets who write about the stars and the movements of the heavenly spheres, these are it's a self-contemplating universe. That's the cosmic, the cosmotheist view. The cosmos, through the mediation of the human brain, contemplates itself, so it is the cosmos which knows itself, and individual humans are just agents in the process of the unfolding and the development of science, a process of cosmic consciousness. Yeah. The humans who think about the cosmos, they are made of stardust. So it is stardust which produces the brain through a very long process chronologically. Stardust produces the brain, and the brain thinks about the history and the development and the laws and the nature and the essence of the cosmos. So it's the cosmos, in this perspective, who uses, in the perspective of atheists, this is unintentionally, the cosmos who has come to use human evolution and the development of human biology and human societies to know itself. When we know the cosmos, we know ourselves. Many years ago, I expressed poetically, the stars cannot speak, but we can express we can speak for the stars, in a way. The fault, dear Brutus, lies not in our stars, but in ourselves, for we are underlings, says Shakespeare. Yeah. No, but actually, it's true. The stardust produces, I simplify, stardust in a chronological perspective has produced human brains, and human brains, they are so smart when they think intelligently about the cosmos that they can get to know the stars and the patterns, the laws which has made them come into being. That's the process of very simple atoms, very simple chemical compounds, and very simple self-replicating cells have come to a very high level of complexity, the human brain and the societies that humans have produced, and the ability to develop science and increase consciousness and self-awareness, the self-aware universe. Yeah. Okay. About ontology, which is the doctrine of being. Through our senses, we live in reality, what is called reality. That's the view of Locke, David Hume, and the classical Anglo-Saxon thinkers. Through our mind, we live in the realm of ideas when we think about the universals, the laws, etc., etc. So the view of the empiricist, that sensation is the origin and the source of all our knowledge, and all attempts at metaphysics are just delusion of the mind. The view of Plato and the idealist, of the classical idealist, that's kind of the opposite. The ideas are primordial, and the material world is just a poor reflection or a manifestation of ideas, depending on the perspective. That's idealism. And the view of Aristotle and Hegel is that ideas, actually, they are being actualized, that would be wirklich, they are being manifested, they are made actual and effective in a way that every singulars, they are precisely manifestation of ideas. The ideas, here, that's the Hegelian interpretation of Aristotle. The view of Hegel is that Aristotle is not a simple-minded empiricist, precisely. He knew that the ideas of Plato, they did not remain God knows where in the realm of ideas, but they were being manifested. The essence came to existence. In religious language, for most Muslims, Jews, and even some Christians, God is considered to be the essence. For the Christians who know their Bible, they are supposed to know that God made human, that's the universal, descended onto earth, that's Jesus, the star, in a way. Christianity is the religion of the singularization of God, the existence of God. Yeah, that's the view, that the God, that's the Christian view, came down here from God knows where to reveal himself to humans. That's the philosophical interpretation of Christianity. Yeah, whereas for the Jews and the Muslims, most of them, God remains unknown, invisible, God knows where, and yeah. About epistemology, the existence, philosophically, the existence is a manifestation of the essence. Every singular fruit manifests the universal, which would be fruit in general. Yeah, and that's against the view of Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, who precisely said that existence precedes essence. The view of Mrs. de Beauvoir is that one is not born a woman, but one becomes a woman. Yeah, so that's existentialism from Sartre and Beauvoir and all the other existentialists. The idea that there is no essence, things exist, they have a Dasein in the vocabulary of Heidegger, and there is no metaphysical realm in a way. But precisely, the trauma, that's my interpretation, but the trauma of the Second World War and the epistemological changes that it has brought about is that the West has given up on science because of the excessive use or misuse of science by the Germans, when I say, and the Japanese and the Italians, but mostly the Germans. They have misused science, one might say, and it has brought about a trauma. And since the end of the Second World War, the West, which had come to dominate the entire world almost since the advent of modernity with the Reformation and then the scientific revolution, has given up on the ideals of science and then later the ideas of the Enlightenment, precisely because it has been eugenics was thought to be abused in a way, that there have been excessive uses of the Darwinian theory of evolution, which has brought about in the early decades of the 20th century the development of eugenics, but because of the excesses of the Germans and the mistreatment of people based on a perceived essence, the racism, anti-Semitism, etc., it has become widespread in public discourse that singular existing objects have no essence, there are no universal, and in the realm of human events, there are no laws. Humans are completely unbounded by natural determinations. That's the modern view, but actually it's kind of delusional. And here, the book by Mr. Per Byland, he says somewhere, the market economy emerges out of people's action, but the behavior of humans in normal economics obeys a certain set of laws, like the laws of physics. So there is a rational order, an objective order, and this belief is no longer held. It hasn't been held for many decades because of the trauma of essentialism and the abuses that it has brought about. So that's why someone like Dawkins, he says in his book that eugenics among human population could very well function scientifically in terms of efficiency. It could function, but it has been morally discredited because of the abuses, the misuses of science. What has been brought science in a way into disrepute, and the question in modern sociological debate is of course the question of race and gender. It is thought that there are no determinations, there are no biological determinations to human behavior, which makes society and humans completely unintelligible. Here I'm searching for a book, and people like Charles Murray, they are simply reintroducing common sense, precisely because the trauma of past excesses, one might say, have brought about an unconscious or sometimes conscious rejection of science. Namely, the modern belief is that in the realm of humans, there are no laws. Women do not behave the way they do because they have woman, the essence of a woman. The same goes for the different ethnic groups. In economics, there is no objective order, so politicians can meddle as much as they want with economics. There is no economic reality. So the modern West suffers, one might say, from a lot of problems, but one of them is the rejection of science. It can be understood in the historical development because of the trauma that past events have created, one might say, but yeah. Just to have a philosophical view, a Spinozian view, a scientific view, is to become aware that every existing object, every singular object, every event obeys laws, is a manifestation of an essence, or forces, or is a singularization of a universal. We live in a world, in the Western world, in the modern world, where people, for ordinary people, because they do not have the time, the interest, the education, the intelligence, sometimes the possibility, they live. These are the people who wander through life from one event to the other without trying to understand the underlying objective order. But among intellect, so for ordinary people, for the aforementioned reason, it's not always that problematic. But among intellectuals, it has become very problematic because a lot of intellectuals they do no longer believe in the law, the objective order, which sometimes it's manipulative, sometimes it's just this self-deception or stupidity. When intellectuals claim that there are no laws, there are no essences, no universals, it grants the legitimacy to politicians, those who implement public policy, to try to meddle with the real world, one might say, without any regard for the effects, either because they consciously manipulate or because they are simply deceived themselves by their beliefs, one might say. But yeah. In economics, the idea that politicians can just print money or create money out of thin air and finance expensive programs, or by borrowing, by getting into debt, and that it will have no effects, it's a complete disregard for basic laws of economics, and this is one of the reasons why there's so much inflation, why there are so much debt, which the consequence is having to pay interest, having to sell assets of countries. The constant printing of money brings about the destruction of capital, disincentivized for investors, for entrepreneurs, etc., etc. And the belief that politicians are almighty and that they can reshape the society with the help of intellectuals. Yeah, but there is an order which which restricts, in a way, the complete reshaping of all social policies. It is well understood in the physical world. Most intelligent, scientifically minded people, they acknowledge that there are laws in physics, chemistry, biology, and the earth sciences, but there is a widely held belief in the modern West that in the realm of human action, in the realm of the social sciences, as they call this, there are no laws. The forces can be manipulated by just political will, can completely reshape. That there are no essences, no universals. So this is why the modern West is so irrational. Because people they tend to react emotionally to singular events without thinking rationally about the underlying structure which determine the singular events precisely. I wrote about correlation and causation and UPS. Philosophically, precisely, the singular, any singular object, it works for humans but for all objects, contains the universal in itself. For instance, every singular woman contains the idea of womanhood, the essence of womanhood within herself. Every singular human contains his own particular ethnic group. There are genetic determinations. They are not the sole cause of behavior, but they partly influence behavior and worldview, etc. Every singular political regime is a singularization of the universal that it embodies. Every singular socialist government or nationalist government or authoritarian government, it's a singularization of a universal, the essence of socialism, the essence of nationalism, the essence of bureaucratic management or whatever. Yeah. So when one understands the determination of the universal or the essence, one can logically deduce that all existing events, all existing singular, all manifested reality which is derived from the universal or the essence will contain the same determinations. Yeah. That's the use of science, the ability to understand, but also to predict, to anticipate, etc., etc. I wrote, state-financed education, every singular, or most of them, singular compulsory educational system, they share the same problems than all the others, because it's ideologically driven, it's a monopoly most of the time, so there is no incentive to perform, there's no need to be efficient. The private sector in realm of education overwhelmingly is more efficient, produces better services, better results than the public sector, because it has competition and it has to compete for customers, whereas the public educational system, because it's a monopoly, it has no competitor. It is guaranteed to have customers, namely the citizens who are compelled and forced to attend public schools, and the ideology is implemented by the state, etc. So that's an example. Most Western countries have had the demographic changes over the past few decades, so that's every singular modern Western country has encountered tremendous demographic changes through immigration over the past decades. That's the reason why most Western countries are encountering a revival of patriotic, proto-nationalist identity politics. We can see the Brexit, Trump, in Italy, Sweden, and other countries. Yeah. I wrote white leftist ethnomasochism. A lot of singular northwestern countries, there is this trend in the modern world. We can notice this, that northwestern European countries, it includes Canada, the US, etc. The left tend to be ethnomasochistic. So yeah, that's an example. About the laws. Here I will just take a glass of water. I will try to make the video less than 2 hours. Every singular autistic person is unique, but it shares with all other autistic persons the same characteristics. That's an example. So about laws. I wrote about the lawfulness of nature. People who advocate a return to nature, nature is the spatial... I know what they mean. They think living outside of urbanized city centers, a more simple life. Yeah, but actually, philosophically, nature is just the spatio-temporal world. And nature, precisely, is not aware of its own laws. So the natural events and phenomena, they obey regularities, laws. The forces, they are determined rationally. But nature nature obeys its own laws unconsciously. The stone which rolls downward, the trees which grow, the wind, the clouds, the thunder, etc., etc. They are not aware, they have no awareness. But man, which is in the continuity of nature, when I say, which is self-conscious nature, nature philosophizing, as Matthew Siegel would say. Where is my classic library? Yeah. Here's a book by Matthew Siegel, a great modern philosopher, a Schillingian philosopher. Yeah. Man is nature philosophizing. That's the story with the stars that I talked about earlier. Yeah, so nature obeys its own laws unconsciously, but man within society and through morality and through social interaction obeys laws consciously. I wrote, the Republican ideal is a noble ideal of a community of free citizens And I wrote, the American Constitution is the highest political achievement of mankind because it enables the development and the thriving of a free society, and it grants freedom, freedom of speech, of association, property rights to its citizen, and it enables the universe, here that's the cosmic perspective, the universe to know itself, because the universe, here that's a chronological, cosmological perspective. The universe has come to develop consciousness. Consciousness has come to develop institutions. So man is a tool of consciousness, a tool of spirit in this perspective. And human institutions, they are conscious laws that human beings who are carriers of consciousness or of spirit give to themselves. And the American Constitution enables the development and the increase of consciousness because it grants a right to free speech and freedom of a free civic life for its citizens. And this is why it enables the universe to know itself, to become aware of itself. That's the self-aware universe, or the self-knowing cosmos. Here, maybe it's a little bit too mystical or too spiritual for a lot of Americans, but in this perspective, which is actually kind of true, in the chronological, cosmological perspective, consciousness emerges out of nature, spirit emerges out of nature, and spirit, through man, gives itself laws of which it is conscious, and this law enables the growth and the development of consciousness. And the highest achievement, in my view, this is the American Constitution, because it grants the fundamental right to free investigation and free inquiry and free debate and free speech, etc., etc. So I wrote about the laws. One might say there are 4 types of laws. Actually, it's just a simplification. There are the natural laws, which is that which is at work in nature, in the hard sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, the earth sciences. There are the laws of human action, what Mises calls praxeology, which is the theory of humans acting, of human action, which has impacts upon sociology, anthropology, economics, politics, etc., etc. Economics is just a branch of praxeology, as envisioned by Mises. Then there are the legislative laws, which is often called positive right. It doesn't mean good, it means the laws which are in existence, the currently existing laws in any given society. This is positive rights or positive laws, those which are in effect, one might say. And then there are the laws of morality. Sometimes they come prior to legislative law because they are primitive, here it's not derogatory, but not very developed societies which have ethical and moral laws without having necessarily written constitutional or institutionalized laws. Yeah, so there are the natural laws, the laws of human action, the legislative laws, and the moral laws in ethics and religion. And sometimes there is a conflict between the moral law and the legislative law, between the personal morality and the objective legislative order. Sometimes there is a conflict between the objective legislative order and the tendencies of human action, because it goes contrary to human impulses. When I say this is one of the reasons why communism historically has failed, it's because the denial of private property and the right to selfishness, in a way, it cannot function, because human beings, they have a selfish instinct which can be sometimes negative but can bring also a lot of good, because it gives the incentive to try to improve one's own well-being, to take care of one's own property, to develop talents, to improve, to get better, etc. In the modern world, preventing mostly in European populated countries, people from gathering based on group belonging, it brings about another violation of a fundamental human need. The need the selfishness that communists have tried to abolish was in a way a legislative law which went contrary to human impulses and natural tendencies, and a forced, imposed multicultural society. If it prevents humans from interacting freely with people of their own group, it's another violation of the fundamental human impulses. Here it's not a moral judgment, it's just to explain that laws can go against natural instinctive impulses of man. Yeah. And then of course the conflicts between morality and legislation, yeah, that's a philosophical question. What is moral? Is a law legitimate? There is the legal aspect and the legitimacy. Sometimes what is legitimate is not legal, and what is legal is not legitimate. So this is what drives the conflicts, the questions about what is fair, what is just, etc., etc. Yeah. About ethics and religion. To act morally, from a philosophical perspective, means to obey a moral code, a set of principles, and to actualize, to realize, to manifest principles, one might say, through one's own behavior, the universal being actualized through singular action. This is what Kant talks about in his critique of practical reason. Here, I'll just take. I will illustrate with a nice T-shirt the message of Kantian ethics. To act ethically in a Kantian perspective means to act according to a set of behavior, a code of ethics, one might say, principles which, if they were universalized, they could be considered good. Now, actually, to act ethically according to Kant means to act on a singular level, which is always local, wherever one finds oneself. The action is always limited because it is a human with a mind and a will, but in a limited body, who acts. But to act ethically according to Kant means to act according to principles which could be potentially, or not only could, but should, that ought to be, universalized. To act on a singular level according to a universal set of rules, namely, you should act according to a law which you should want to be the law that should govern the moral behavior of all humans, of all rational agents, not in the singular aspect, but in the particular or universal aspects. Here, precisely because a good set of ethics is when the principles or the universal or the laws, the moral laws, are identical, when they ought to be universal for all rational agents, but the singular or particular aspects, of course, they have to be adapted or depending on the criteria, the age of the person, the sex, the ethnic group, the level of intelligence, the level of psychological maturity and health, the role, etc. One cannot expect exactly the same behavior on a singular level from persons with very different characteristics and features, but that's precisely because UPS, but the universal, if that's the Kantian view, with which I tend to agree, is that the universal, the guiding principle of a moral behavior ought to be able to be applied to all rational agents. then it has to be adapted to each particular context and to each singular individual, but the fundamental laws, and here that's why in religion it is often said by those who defend religion that the great religions, they all share a common set of core beliefs. They are all adapted, particularized to the specific area or era in which they sprang forth, but the fundamental moral teachings, they tend to be more of the same. It's you know the story. It's written in most good religious books. Yeah, and precisely about religion, I wrote, in religion, the principles of ethics or the laws, the moral laws, they are being revealed in the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the teachings of the Buddha, etc., etc. The religious book, they reveal the principles, the teachings, but philosophy is just a rationalization of religion. Philosophers, they deduce logically the principles. When they talk about ethics, a philosophical view on ethics is logical and grounded and supported by arguments and reasoning, whereas in religion it is revealed. But actually the form is different, but the content is the same. The philosophy of Kant is just a rationalization of the Christian morality, the teachings of Jesus, in a way. That's a rational outlook on Christian morality, in a way. That Nietzsche was clear-minded, that's why he criticized Kant, and because he was opposed to some aspects of Christianity, one might say. That's what Plato does in his book The Laws, that's what Fichte does. All great philosophers who have talked about ethics, but precisely sometimes, here that's the Hegelian criticism actually, the philosopher, they have had the tendency to want to be legislators and religious reformers, in a sense, to give a strict code to follow, whereas precisely the philosophers, that's what Kant did, they shouldn't try to infer and to deduce what ought to be done on a singular level with all the empirical aspect, but just the principles, the code, the laws, not the particularization, the singularization, etc., etc. Because otherwise philosophy of ethics become utopian thinking in a negative sense. The attempt to control, to a priori infer all the behaviors, the supposed behavior which have to be implemented to the whole of society. If it becomes implemented politically, it can degenerate, and most of the time does, into authoritarianism, etc., totalitarianism. That's the criticism made by Karl Popper to Plato, or to Rousseau. Plato, Rousseau, they have been accused a posteriori of having been the ideological fathers of the excesses of communism. Zizek talks about this, but the modern epistemologist, in the liberal, in the good sense, epistemologists like Popper, they criticize the pretense of knowledge. Hayek does this as well, of the philosopher who claim to deduce how a society ought to be organized. That's the view of Mises and Hayek, and all the previous liberal thinkers. Also, in terms of ethics, there is a dichotomy between the Kantian view. I simplify. Here, Michael Sandel made a series of great lectures at Harvard University many years ago. There's a distinction between acting according to principles, that's the Kantian view, and the utilitarian view, which is the Anglo-Saxon view, means to act while considering the effects that the action bring. So it is to consider the Anglo-Saxons, they tend to consider the morality of an act based on the effects that it brings, whereas the German view, the Kantian view actually, an act is moral if the principles from which it derives is moral. Of course, there is a conflict because sometimes acting according to principles can bring about negative consequences, and sometimes acting with the greater good of the greater number in mind, it can mean to violate one's own belief. So there is a conflict. It's illustrated in the Dark Knight by Christopher Nolan, Batman, etc. But and here the Kantian view, it sounds very good, but there is I think Monsieur, what's his name? Charles Péguy, who was a French writer, said Kant has the hands of Kant are pure, but he has no hands. Precisely because Kantian morality is very pure, but it's so pure that it's detached from ordinary reality. So in a way, it's very difficult to implement. It's an ideal of reason, of course. Kant was intelligent enough to know this, but for instance, the example which is often mentioned in philosophy introduction is if the principle is thou shalt not lie, or thou shalt say the truth. Of course, speaking the truth, that's a good moral principle, but speaking the truth to everyone, all the truth, you talk about everything to everyone, it's kind of a little bit ludicrous in a way. Yeah, you have to adapt to the empirical context. This is common sense. This is why the Anglo-Saxons, they tend to bring balance to the idealism in the negative sense here, not in the philosophical sense, but in the moral idealism, because precisely trying to be a very moral person, when you encounter the limitations of the empirical world, it's difficult. That's why, yeah, it's yeah. And I wrote about human institutions. God is being, that's the Hegelian view, God is being realized, actualized, manifested on earth, partly through human institutions. That's what the boring German metaphysics, the intelligent German metaphysician calls objective spirit. The human institutions are an actualization, are supposed to be an actualization of the will of God, which is the forces of morality, which means human will, human action. And here, the view, the progressive view, in a way, the view of the progressive is that maybe not all of them, but morality, here precisely the passage from morality to ethics or into legislation is that law, rights, the institutions are supposed to reflect personal morality. Morality in a religious view is what is personal, whereas laws and institutions are what is objective. There is a conflict sometimes because a certain view says that, I mean, some people says that humans they ought to have a free space for moral behavior, and not everything ought to be politicized and turned into legislation. There has to be room on a singular level for personal action. So here there are two views again which are conflicting. Those who think, I simplify, the common laws ought to be kept to a minimum, and it is personal morality and interaction between human groups based on free will which ought to be dominant, and the objective legislative order should be kept to a minimum. That would be a liberal, classical libertarian view. And there are those who think, no, if morality is genuinely good, the principles ought to be turned into law. The moral law ought to become legislative law. It ought to be objectified in institutions, but then there's the risk of authoritarianism and despotism. Yeah. And here the US, they are sane because they allow all opinions to express themselves, but of course, in order for society not to fall into anarchy, there has to be social regulation. So here, the US, historically, they have found the best balance, one might say, between granting the greatest, how should I explain this? Yeah, what I've been talking about for a few minutes is regulation. Either it is regulation by law, objective, state-endorsed laws, or regulation by social groups. There are many laws which are not written and which are not... there are many behaviors which are not illegal, but which are morally wrong, and one way of regulating a society, because all societies have to be regulated, is to morally condemn improper behavior by ostracizing people, but without condemning them legally. Because if all the flaws or the inherent limitations of human nature are made compulsory behavior through legislation, it brings about authoritarianism and despotism and bureaucratic totalitarianism. So historically the US, they have found one of the best balances, one might say, at least up until the past few decades, because the society was very free, because there was a limited amount of government. But of course, in order for such a society not to fall into anarchy, behaviors had to be regulated, and there were very strong social regulation. This is why Ron Paul, he understands very well that in order for a society to be free, the government has to be limited to the greatest amount possible, but in order for such a society to be sustainable and to be able to live in such a society, the people has to be disciplined on an individual level. It's a matter of self-discipline and collective social discipline, but not forceful imposition by government, but self-regulation by communities. And in order for communities to be self-regulated without the need of oppressive government regulation, there has to be morality and religion, what I say, and it has to be this is one of the purposes of religion, to regulate social interactions by restricting the behaviors and the negative tendency of people. But in order for people to willingly cooperate, they have to share certain common features between them. Yeah, which is one of the reasons why really forceful imposition of diversity on society, it brings about the dissolution of society, because people who are really different in terms of ethnicity, culture, origin, then social status, etc., due to inequality of income, it's very difficult to form a cohesive society, and it gives the legitimacy to state intervention to regulate ever more behavior, which it's supposed, in a healthy society, behavior is supposed to be self-regulated. A grown-up society is a society where the amount of state legislation and bureaucracy is reduced to a minimum, and people are able to morally interact with one another. And when there are moral excesses or wrongdoings, individuals, of course, they have to be shunned, and there has to be a punishment to enable the stabilization and the continuity of the group, but it doesn't have to be overly politicized and excessive in terms of state power. This is the libertarian view. That's why in order to have a free society, humans have to be disciplined, self-discipline, order, morality, etc. Ron Paul understands this very well. Yeah. And what regulates the behavior of a lot of people in the modern West is when it's not legislation, it's fear of being ostracized, of having one's own reputation being brought into disrepute, because people who have the prestige, the power, the influence, they form very strict moral communities. Kevin MacDonald talks about this in the book about Western individualism, and they tend to exclude as being considered unworthy, morally impure, deplorable. People are being shunned, are being their status is being thwarted by the moral elite, and they are not allowed to participate, to express their views, or to be respected by the leaders of the moral community, but precisely because of the aforementioned reason at the beginning of the lecture. There are tiny groups of people with a lot of influence, very intelligent people with the means of communication. They can influence millions of lives, and they can shape the perception of others, and that's why this dissent has been censored morally, because talking about certain topics or expressing certain views, which are not always reasonable, obviously, but sometimes they are reasonable, but they are being shunned by the moral community, and this is really a religious mentality, but in a way it can be negative when it's excessive, but actually the need to draw boundaries and to coalesce groups of humans in communities based on a certain set of moral principles is what enables social, peaceful, social, harmonious, social coexistence with individuals with sometimes conflicting interests. Yeah. About emotions and rationality. Acting spontaneously in terms of ethics means acting according to emotions, instincts, and a primal nature, whereas acting rationally means acting with the intellect, reflection, and with a higher nature. And here that's a little bit philosophical view. Behaving morally. There are a lot of people who are kind. Here, I will pick up the book by Stephanie. There are a lot of people who are considered good because they are kind. They are nice to other people, they are kind, they are good-hearted, and indeed it can bring a lot of good aspects, but to act morally from a philosophical perspective, it means not to act, not to do good to others, or to prevent doing harm to others. So sometimes you can do good to others, but sometimes not doing them harm is a way of doing them good. Yeah, because sometimes when you try to do good to others, it can bring negative consequences for others because, yeah. So not doing harm is a way of doing good in a way, but the doing good, it's good as well. Yeah, but from a philosophical perspective, being kind, of course it's good, but actually to act morally means to act according to rational principles. And here I just take an example. Often women, they have empathy, they show empathy towards others in social life because sociobiologically they are programmed to care about infants, so they have a more nurturing nature. One may say they tend to show more empathy towards others a lot of times, and to be more emotional. But of course it's kind of good, but it's not always moral, precisely because emotional, a morality based on emotions and feelings, if it's not regulated, it can become excessive. Here the examples are, of course, the policies which are implemented to help the poor, the disenfranchised, the migrants, etc. Most of the time it comes from good intentions from leftists. A lot of people who support and endorse these policies, redistribution, etc., it comes from a good intention, but actually the consequences, often they are detrimental. The minimum wage, here an example, the minimum wage laws, it harms the people with lower skills and often the minorities are being harmed by the policies which are supposed to help them. And also there are people who are kind of cynical and they use the emotional needs of the people to show kindness, which is kind of good, but when it is being manipulated by people, they use the kindness and the altruism of people to implement policies which harm society and which only benefit the schemers, one might say. I'm not a schemer. I try to show the schemers how pathetic their attempts to control things really are. That's a joke. No, but yeah, seriously, there are, of course, a lot of people who, not a lot, but there are politicians, not only, but there are people in position of power who use the spontaneous, kind tendencies and emotional, affectionate, empathy of the people, mostly women, to implement policies which only benefit the schemers and which have detrimental effects onto the whole of society. And here, women, they tend to think with their heart, one might say, and not with their mind, and to see only the short term, only the emotional aspect, and they are unable to recontextualize within the totality. That's why deceiving women and using women and their supposed kindness toward others is a means to manipulate and to wreck a society. Yeah, because here I just take an example. Women, it can be noticed empirically, they have a tendency when they see beggars to give them money. Not all of them, but statistically they are more prone to giving money to people who ask money. It seems to be good and kind-hearted, but actually if beggars, if they are given money and not, if they are given a handout and not a hand, it will only encourage them unconsciously to remain in this position, whereas they should be given opportunities to overcome their situation. They should be encouraged to work, to re-socialize, and not to be given money, because it comes from a good intention. You see a poor person, you give him money, but if everyone does this, it only strengthens the social problem, because when you subsidize a behavior, it increases the demand. That's an economic law. Yeah. That's why not helping the poor, it appears to be cold, but actually it's a means to help them, because to really help the poor, it's not by giving them money, but it's by creating the institution which enable them, which give them the opportunity to get out of their poverty through effort, if they are willing. That's the classical American view. And here Charles Murray, in some of his books, he shows that America had declining statistics about poverty up until the 1960s, and when poverty was in decline, and when the Americans with JFK started to wage war on poverty by implementing government programs, it increased poverty, because if you subsidize poverty, people will have an interest in being poor. If you subsidize single mothers, it increases the quantity of single mothers. If you subsidize being unemployed, etc., it encourages unconsciously people to be unemployed. That's why a lot of leftist policies, they appear as being kind and good-hearted, but actually the effects are wrong economically, socially, and yeah, that's why morality has to be founded upon rationality. Here, that's the Kantian view. David Hume would disagree. He said that it was based in emotions, but precisely it has to have a rational component. But sometimes it's good to be kind without much thinking. That's grace, that's kindness. Sometimes you just being good to others, okay, but a genuine ethics, here that philosophical view has to be founded upon rational principles which ought to be universalized, and you ought to take into account the effects in the longer term for everyone, or for the broadest range of people. Yeah. about principles and consequences, if a principle is flawed or wrong, the conclusions which are derived will be false as well. It just takes time to unfold. Here, that's an example. The Austrians, their views on economics, on the monetary, the topics of money, the Austrians like Ron Paul and actually the economists of the Austrian school, their views are correct because they understand that the principles of fiat currency, for instance, or government intervention, the principles are wrong and the consequences therefore will be wrong, and in terms of fiat money the consequences are inflation. But it takes time to unfold and it takes time for people to notice the detrimental consequences of sometimes hidden economic or monetary principles. Yeah, but it's not, how should I explain this? Here, that's the Austrian method to understand that an economic policy or an economic way of reasoning is wrong because it's flawed a priori, then you do not need empirical validation. That's the arrogant aspect of the Austrians and the German metaphysicians. Sometimes they say, empiricism, no, I'm sure of my metaphysics, so I don't need validation. But actually, when the reasoning is coherent and consistent, it's not that the experience is not necessary, but simply here I just make a remark about Austrian economics. The way the Austrian reason is that precisely they say that that's not how they express this, but one has to think metaphysically about economics precisely because if only events and empirical data are taken and there is no rational conceptual frame to give meaning and to interpret the data, it's very easy for the scholars, the journalists, the politicians to manipulate the data and to misinterpret willingly or sometimes unwillingly, but either to deceive or to misinterpret the data. And if there is no coherent, consistent metaphysical frame, conceptual frame to interpret the economic data, they can be mingled, mixed, to present a different picture than what the actual workings of the economy offer. Yeah. Also, about utopia, there's a temptation for intellectuals to construct an ideal world a priori, a world of ideas, disconnected from reality because it's easier to move in the realm of ideas than to move in the empirical world, because precisely the empirical world offers resistance, one might say, while it's easier to think abstractly. That's the origin of leftist totalitarianism and violence, is that leftist intellectuals, in a broader sense, it includes Plato and Rousseau and Marx, the collectivist utopians, one might say. Plato was not a leftist in the modern sense, he was much right-winger, but in a way he was a proto-communist. Here, left and right are not relevant categories, but the utopians, yeah, let us use the word, the utopian. They tend to be on the left. There are right-wing utopians as well, but they tend to be overwhelmingly on the left. The intellectuals who want to build the ideal society in their mind, precisely because it is detached from empiricism, reality, experience, they tend to move intellectually in pure abstractions, and then when it is implemented by politicians, Lenin for Marx, Robespierre for Rousseau, and then all the communist revolutionaries, etc., when the ideas or the failures of the self-organizing communist communities in the 19th century, the communist, not communist, but the collectivist utopias which have all failed, or yeah, the collectivist, sometimes religious utopias, most of the time they fail in the longer term, precisely because to realize the ideas, sometimes it's difficult because there are determination of reality which could not be anticipated beforehand, one might say. Yeah, that's the view of Hayek, who was kind of clear-minded. Hayek was a very clear-minded intellectual because precisely the pretense of knowledge is the criticism that the libertarians and Hayek made of intellectuals who wants to think society a priori and to impose their views onto society through political action. Yeah, there's a tendency for the less intelligent people to not connect the data. So the very intelligent, they tend to live in a world of abstraction, and their ideas are not always in the realm of politics. Most of the time they are not sustainable, and they are not even they are not they cannot be applied or at very great cost, because they are precisely utopian and delusional. But the other problem is that there's a tendency for less intelligent people to be only focused on the empirical aspect without even trying to seek or understand or know the laws which determine the events. Yeah, that's why it's very easy to manipulate if the data are incomplete, or if the metaphysical frame is incoherent or lacking. Yeah, that's why a book like this, Economic Science and the Austrian Method, is very important, because the epistemology here, I imagine that I talk to ordinary people, epistemology is the theory of knowledge. It's very important to understand how a science is founded upon, what a science is founded upon, and how it operates. It seems very abstract, but actually if the epistemology or the method of knowledge of a scientific field is flawed or wrong, all the consequences which derive from the false or flawed principles will be wrong. That's why ordinary people, they experience empirically the effects of failed policies, and they do not have the time or the interest or the awareness that the constantly failing government policies which are being implemented, they are the result of flawed economic principles. And yeah, I wrote about reason. So here, a return to philosophy. Yeah, for Kant, there are contradictions in thought. This is what he calls antinomies of reason. The categories, the building blocks of the mind, they are in contradiction with one another. So for Kant, the intellect was, what he calls reason, was in conflict with itself. These are what he calls the antinomies of reason. It's in the Kritik der reinen Vernunft. For Hegel, the contradictions are within reality and within thought as well. Yeah, so yeah, that's what drives the process. Yeah. And then about knowledge. So yeah, Kant, he tried to avoid the conflicting aspect of reason by limiting knowledge, whereas Hegel tried to think the unfolding of reality driven by an attempt to overcome conflicting tendencies into higher, not a higher synthesis, but into a more concrete unity which incorporates within itself more diverse elements, one might say, to become more concrete, more rich, one might say, the more fully determined, more evolved, etc., etc. Yeah. And to think the constantly moving world, a new type of logic is required, speculative logic. That's the historical genesis of the philosophy of Hegel. And about knowledge, to know in ordinary language means to be acquainted with or accustomed to be familiar with the empirical aspect. And to know in philosophical sense, means to conceptualize, means to grasp the universal, the laws or the essence. Yeah. And to know the laws enables to anticipate or to predict. And here, someone like Mises, is in a way an exceptional thinker, because in this book, his book about socialism in 1922, in the chronological perspective, he anticipated the impossibility of a functioning socialist economy. It's not because he was some sort of a wizard, but it simply was very intelligent, so he understood theoretically that for inherent fundamental reasons, socialism could not work as an economic system, and therefore all potential subsequent existing socialist economies would have problems economically, and it has been confirmed. Yeah, that's why it's important to philosophize. And Mises was in a way a kind of a philosopher, a moral philosopher. Here, morality means the realm of action, human action, praxeology, but he was an indirect heir of Kant. He drew a lot of inspiration from Kantian epistemology. Yeah. So, yeah. That's what I had to say. Okay. So that's an introduction to I don't know, metaphysics. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I had to say. I don't know if it's clear. I've improvised the structure. I wrote this in a few minutes yesterday. I've been improvising for more than 2 hours. But actually, yeah, just trying to get people interested in metaphysics in the broadest sense. That's maybe a lecture on philosophical dualism. Yeah. And where is... These two people, they have had an enduring legacy, one might say. Philosophy is... where is... I will conclude with... Yeah. Philosophy is nothing but a series of footnotes to Plato, as Matthew Siegel often says. Yeah. Maybe I could at some moment make a video of footnotes to Hegel. Yeah. So that's what I had to say. Hopefully it's clear. It's not very rigorous, but actually Yeah, it's simplified. It could be nature and theory, concrete and abstract. Yeah, no other distinction, but that's the view of philosophy simplified. I'm a little bit exhausted. I will conclude with my classical joke. I do not work for free, although I work for freedom. So not only I work for free, but I also work for freedom. Yeah. That's what I had to say.